Focus on Connecticut. I'm Tom Appleby. Our guest, Congressman Jim Himes, Democrat from the 4th District. This week, again, which is Tuesday, the judge has just said health care. It's inappropriate for the nation to insist that private citizens take on commercial insurance.
Right. We've now seen 4 rulings in federal court. 2 have said that the legislation was constitutional. 2 have said that it was unconstitutional. And of course they refer to the mandate, which is one part of a very large piece of legislation. I'm not a lawyer. I'm not a constitutional lawyer, so I'm not the best person to ask whether the Supreme Court will rule it to be constitutional. It seems to be 2-2 in federal court right now. The issue I think about and worry about is that the fact is, in this country, if you get sick or you get hit by a bus, you will be treated. You will show up in an emergency room. So, and if you don't have the money to pay for it, all of the rest of us that do pay for health insurance subsidize you. So setting aside the legality of this, do we want a system where you can elect not to pay into it? Just say, I'm not interested in that. And by the way, you've got the means. We're not going to ask people who don't have the means to pay into it, but you've got the means to pay into it. I choose not to. What that person is saying is that when I get hit by a bus and show up in an emergency room, you all get to pay for it. That's not a fair system. So we'll see where the courts go on this, but there has to be some mechanism where, since we ensure that everybody, if no other location gets served in an emergency room, gets served, that we all chip in if we can afford to.
State of the Union address. You were encouraged that the president talked about education, spent a lot of time talking about clean energy. Let's talk about both of those for a sec. We hear so much about clean energy. Every ad on TV these days seems to have that as a background message. But the oil companies are still almost all powerful. How do you get to that point with that kind of lobbying?
Well, you know, clean energy is important for a bunch of reasons. It's important for environmental reasons. It's important for one reason that is near and dear to everybody's heart, as is education, by the way, which is jobs. You made reference to it earlier. It is still the #1 issue that people are worried about. It is the #1 issue that we in Washington are focused on. Let's talk about other revolutions in technology, the IT revolution. Google, Microsoft, you know, these massive companies that are worth tens of billions of dollars that employ hundreds of thousands of people. The choice for us is, do we want to be part of that? Do we want it to happen right here the way it happened in Silicon Valley and in the 128 corridor in Boston with clean energy, which is going to dwarf the IT revolution? Or do we want it to happen in China and Europe, which is where it's happening right now? So if for no other reason, set aside the very compelling arguments around the environment, around getting us off of Saudi and Venezuelan oil, if we want the millions of jobs that are going to come from solar, from other alternative energy sources, making turbines the way GE does right here in the United States, we're going to get serious about moving to alternative energy. And we're going to do that because our leadership at every level, not just Washington, but in Hartford and in towns and cities across this country, we say we're going to shift over to alternative energy.
And we also need to do this in education. We're clearly lagging behind. How do you ramp that up?
Well, this is, you know, people always ask the questions, what can you do about jobs? And the fact is, you know, we did some things in the last 2 years that helped turn this economy around. You know, we're adding jobs instead of losing them. GDP is growing instead of shrinking. But it's not nearly satisfying enough. And so the focus is still on the near term. But in the medium and long term, our competitiveness and the kinds of jobs that will be available to my 2 daughters depend on how well they are educated. And you know what? We're deep in the pack relative to Asia and Europe. You look at things like high school graduation, math scores, we're not top 3. That means that what I was saying earlier about where these companies get started, where are the engineers that found the energy company that's going to transform the world, where are they going to be? And unless our educational system is first rate, #1, it may not be here in the U.S.
We talk about making teachers the heroes, elevating them in society. And there's a move afoot right now by a group of Republican governors to eliminate tenure. So on the one hand, you're saying this is something kids you should aspire to. And on the other hand, we're saying, you know what, there's a lot of dead wood in there. We ought to be cleaning them out.
Yeah, well, you know, we have for far too long been pretty hypocritical about the way we've talked about our teachers. You know, we say to them, guys like me, elected officials, and everybody else says, you're the most important career, the most important thing you teach, you are the future of America, here's your $28,000 a year starting salary. You know, we don't put our budget where our mouth is. Now, it seems to me that with teachers, there is no better way to improve a system of education than to make sure that every classroom has a first-rate teacher in it. So it seems to me there's a deal to be struck, which is you'll get more respect, more prestige, more compensation, more security in exchange for accountability. Because what you do is so valuable, we will be very focused on making sure that you do it superbly. That strikes me as the deal. And when people say we're going to do away with tenure, I think what they're saying is we want more accountability and better performance in the system.
We're going to take a break, but I want to just stay with this when we come back, because there are those who say it's a lot easier to do that in an upscale suburb school than it is in the inner city. Feed those kids first at home, then I'll teach you when they come to class. We'll talk about it right after this.